The first mindset that squarely needs to change for anyone that's starting out a venture or whatever stage that is in is money is not always going to be available. There is still ample money out there in the market that's sloshing around, and probably raising a couple of $1 million is not very difficult, right? But I'd firmly believe, and I'd definitely request, suggest anyone who's getting onto this journey is don't play the valuation game. At the end of it, your business, your product needs to stitch into a very logical path to profitability. If you do not have a path to profitability, there is going to be a time when the money stops. The business becomes unsustainable.
Welcome back to the August edition of Founder Spotlight series on behalf of Tracxn, where we invite various startup co-founders to share their journey, some sort of insights and advice to the youngsters who have startup dreams. Well, today with me is Mr. Varun Joshi, who is the founder of Unwired Connect. Hi, Varun. How are you doing today?
Very well. Thank you very much for asking, Zubair.
Wonderful. Great. Doing great as well. First of all, welcome to this podcast on behalf of Tracxn family. And thanks for making some time out of your busy schedule.
It's a pleasure being here.
My name is Supayan Das Gupta, and I'm heading the startup vertical over here. Now, let's get started with this whole conversation. To start with, Varun, we would love to understand your background and what made you start the concept of Unwired Connect. What is Unwired Connect all about?
Sure. So we started Unwired Connect roughly around 5 years back with the basic thought process that IoT is barely scratched the surface in India, but it's the inevitable future. In fact, it's very funny. If you look around, you have these talks about everything getting connected. In fact, incrementally, if you observe, hardware or the stuff that you use in and around are all getting connected. But when you look at the space of IoT in general, from my lens or from Unwired Connect's lens, we actually bracketed it into 3 verticals, right? On the left, you have the platforms. On the right, you have the consumers. But the centerpiece is the hardware, which essentially means there needs to be a hardware that can be synced with a platform that the consumer can operate. Now, I can give you a very interesting corollary to this. Imagine your cell phone, right? The cell phone in itself is of no relevance. You need a SIM card inserted into the cell phone, which makes the cell phone usable to the consumer. And now if you paint that corollary with what I explained earlier, so you have the hardware, which is what Unwired makes. You have various platforms, whether it's Kasambi, Tuya, Geo, right? And then consumers. Now it's this space of hardware in India, which was absolutely vacant space. So even today, when we talk about the smart products that are available in the country, including by some of the larger brands, right? We can very confidently say that all of those are actually imported from China. So to that extent, Unwired Connect is the only company that's probably carried on the journey of designing, developing, and manufacturing each of these products in-house in the country. Of course, the starting point was lighting management systems or lighting controls, because this is the lowest hanging fruit, right? It's the easiest for a consumer to adopt. And the consumer in general has had some kind of affinity towards it in terms of wired automation. But what Unwired Connect is basically doing is it's saying that wireless is the future. You do not need to spend on expensive wiring. Essentially, as level 1, talk about democratizing automation. But like I said, LMS was just the starting point of the journey. And as we stand, there are plans already being chalked out of entering the smart appliance and even in the healthcare space of the IoT. As for my background, I I was an investment banker for 10 years. And it's through that journey, seeing so many companies, evaluating so many businesses, being upfront with some of the founders is probably where this idea seemed extremely interesting. And at Unwired Connect, I have my co-founder and CTO, Nitesh Vasan, who is actually the architect and brain for a lot of projects that come out. And that's how together as a team we decided to roll ahead with Unwired Connect.
Wonderful. I think it's a great start to this conversation, knowing your company and what it does. Tell me this, uh, with the next vision of yours for the next 12 months down the line, is there anything specific which you are most excited about?
Uh, so at this juncture, of course, it's an endless integration process. And the one thing that we probably proudly claim, maybe globally, definitely in India, is Unwired Connect is protocol and platform agnostic, which essentially means it's a single hardware which integrates with any of the platforms that you bring in, which is not the case with anyone. Everybody would have a different hardware for a different platform. And with that philosophy, we actually want to expand our offering over and above the current lighting management system space to, like I said, maybe a consumer appliance space. And as we speak, there is a lot of work going on at the lab. We are in the teams working very hard on this to probably fulfill one of the visions that we have is try and make an entry into the consumer appliance, right? So let's imagine a house or a space, right? Today I have my lights which probably interact with me via my app or via Alexa or Google. We already have products that probably automate your television, your AV, your air conditioning, right? All of them being operated by your app or through Google or Alexa. The next logical step for us was actually to further make inroads into a house. Imagine your coffee machine responding to your command, right? Or your water heater or your water kettle or your air fryer. So that's where essentially the vision is moving towards.
Very interesting. Now, when you started the journey a few years back, I guess in 2021, 22, if you can remember, one of the most significant challenges which the whole team would have faced, and that was quite difficult for you people to tackle. Would you like to share any one of those challenges with us?
Oh no, so there were a numerous bunch of challenges
Yeah,
because you need to probably stress on one of the few points that I made earlier, right? And that was that Unwired Connect is the only company that's treaded on the journey of designing, developing, and manufacturing all of this in-house, right? Typically, and this is without recourse or casting aspersions, but traditionally as a mindset, India is a country of traders, right? Developing, innovating, and R&D aren't particularly part of our culture. Imagine an entire industry being satiated through imports from either China or Europe. So to that extent, when Unwired Connect started its journey, we weren't competing with a company. In fact, even right now, we can proudly claim that there is probably no other company in this country which probably does what Unwired Connect does, right? We were essentially competing with a country, and the country was called China, right? And when we started on this entire journey, the basic premise was setting up a manufacturing unit, right? Which we did, and which we probably did flawlessly with all of the processes, the system that any international company would have. But that's when we realized that one of the most sore point here, which we probably took lightly, didn't factor it or took it for granted, is availability of manpower. And when I say manpower, of course, there is a lot of manpower available. But the question is the manpower that's available skilled enough to understand what is it we're trying to do? Because what we are trying to do in terms of designing from scratch, prototyping, testing, building, developing, and then putting it out into the market was this is something probably absolutely new, right? And to that extent, all of a sudden, teams had these black holes in terms of skilled manpower or learned manpower that understand the process from start to the end. So that was one of the first aspects that we faced. The second, of course, is, and I'm sure that is probably sacrosanct across companies in any form of manufacturing, is supply chain, right? Um, a typical smart driver can take in anywhere between 85 to 100 plus components, right? These are these individual components. Unfortunately, India has an ecosystem of none of this. Even if India would have an ecosystem, they don't meet the quality benchmarks that we desire. And that's the other facet that we encountered, is relying on aggregators that typically would aggregate these components from globally and sell it to you did not give out batch consistencies. And for a product to be successful through years, through cycles, through generations, requires extreme batch consistency, which necessitated us actually having to probably travel to Taiwan, Europe, China, make direct linkages with factories, and eventually make this supply chain which is suited directly to us. So, I mean, so to put it into perspective for you, we've actually sunk in the first year just into R&D, with an entire factory already being set up that is waiting for a product to come up. So availability of learned manpower and supply chain are probably two of the biggest challenges that we faced initially, and we continue to face them. But of course, we are just a lot more smarter. We've learned through the journey, and we are figuring out ways on how to surmount that.
Understood. Varun, maybe in the last 1 year or so, or maybe I would say the impact of AI is much on the higher scale. If I count the last 2 years, right, 2.5 years, right. Would love to understand from your side in the last 1 year or so, in your operational ecosystem, how the impact of AI was there and how did you leverage it?
So, see, in terms of manufacturing per se, hardcore, uh, I'd still like to believe that we are a little far away from AI having a very major impact in terms of disturbing what's on ground, right? Uh, from our scheme of thing and our lens, AI is actually only an accentuator. It just helps make things so much easier, right from whether we talk about a PCB design, a prototyping, right? Or our entire process flow. Typically, to get through a finished product of a smart IoT device that Unwired manufactures, just in terms of stages, is probably in excess of 14 stages, right? All of which was, of course, manually looked at, worked upon using an ERP. Even in terms of forecasting or material resource planning, was, if I wouldn't say automated, semi-automated, because it still required human intervention, and it did not have any intelligence that would help in predictability. And AI has actually helped us bridge some of these gaps, specifically on the R&D and the prototyping side. So AI, in fact, for Unwired Connect has been a great perpetrator in terms of turning around neo development and shortening the development cycles, which let's assume would typically take anywhere between 9 to 12 months, is probably now around to under 6 months.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let me just change the topic a bit now, right? And shift gears. Okay. Uh, by any chance, is Unwired Connect preparing for fundraising in recent times?
Uh, Not in the next 12 months. Uh, Surprisingly, and very unlike Indian startups, and that to manufacturing, Unwired Connect actually is fairly profitable, right? I mean, just looking at the pro forma numbers for this year, the company reported a net profit margin in excess of 20%, which I think is very good, right? Considering we are a hardcore manufacturing firm. Uh,
Right.
Continue to remain bootstrapped. Um, Cash flows are immensely stable. That said, we will look out for fundraise in the next 24 months, but that is purely and purely going to be from the lens of scale. We are going to hit a capacity. The company's been growing at inception at a CAGR of 50%, right? And that there's no reason why that growth trajectory does not continue. And that growth trajectory actually is going to necessitate probably 2028 massive capex, seen in conjuncture with our aspirations of getting into the consumer appliance space. Uh, that's when we are probably going to be looking at some funding.
Understood.
There are growth requirements.
Got it. So even if it happens, it'll be around 24 months down the line, right?
Assuming the preps for which probably start
Ah,
to online.
understood. Now, from a very general perception, and you as a very senior person in industry, talking about the thought process which comes to the mind of any startup co-founder when he goes for fundraising, how well we can address these three aspects: the why, when, and where to start fundraise journey. What do you feel about it? Have you ever thought about it? Why to raise, when to raise, and where to start from?
No, sure. So I wouldn't answer those questions specifically in those three contexts, Supayan, but I might have a slightly digressing view in terms of, and I know a lot of founders, a lot of them are friends, and personally, I've actually probably seeded quite a few companies as well, right? And I speak to a lot of these guys, and somehow the trends where that I've observed in the last few years is fundraising just became an ends to means and not a means to an end, right? To the extent that it just became a sexy game that this is what I'm worth today. Money is actually a fuel to growth, right? It is not the only facet where you are making business. The first mindset that squarely needs to change for anyone that's starting out a venture or whatever stage that is in is money is not always going to be available, right? It's not on tap. There was a time when it was, and there is still ample money out there in the market that's sloshing around, and probably raising a couple of $1 million is not very difficult, right? But I'd firmly believe, and I'd definitely request, suggest anyone who's getting onto this journey, is don't play the valuation game. At the end of it, your business, your product needs to stitch into a very logical path to profitability. If you do not have a path to profitability, there is going to be a time when the money stops. The business becomes unsustainable. So don't
Right.
use money to flare up your valuation and make more money. Use money as a fuel to make your business with a very solid carved out path to profitability. Otherwise, there is an end game, right? There is going to be a time when your existing investors or the pool of investors that's available in the market is going to say, if there is no end path to profitability, then what am I putting money in this? It's not a circular game. There needs to be meant to it. So I I firmly recommend, suggest, and probably push some of these guys, right? The starting point of making or thinking about a startup is not that you'll get funding and get a valuation. The starting point needs to be that you want to actually create a business which is sustainable, has a path to profitability. That could be a 5 year path to profitability, where you say for the next 5 years, I'm going to make this money, which is fine, but have a path to profitability. Like in the colloquial sense, your parents or the prior generation did, right? Money didn't come first, your business came first. That's exactly how we've culled out Unwired, right? Uh, at no juncture has there been any moment or any situation where investments have been stopped. If you are a R&D driven tech organization that Unwired Connect is, you're bound to make mistakes. You're bound to lose money in innovation, which doesn't work out, but that's fine. Right? But it doesn't mean that stops or that becomes the basis of only external funding. A healthy balance sheet is probably the most important.
There's a question which I keep asking to a lot of founders, especially people who are, let's say, very much experienced in the market, right? Uh, you must have seen that most of the startup co-founders these days are in their late 20s, right? You must have observed this.
Yeah.
Uh, any specific advice you would love to give to a person who is in his late 20s and planning to start something on his own, with regards to he should, what kind of path he should be avoiding right? What he should be avoiding before even if he decides to start something on his own? What would be that piece of advice from your side?
So, in fact, the piece of advice, Supan, would be exactly what I said prior, right? Don't start a business from the lens of the fact that it's easy to raise money and I'll get a valuation. Start a business that you really feel is a white space, is an opportunity out there to be grabbed. It could be an existing business that somebody else is doing, but you could probably do it better. But think about the business, not about the valuation. But on the same premise, the other facet that I'd probably definitely tell these guys to keep at the back of their mind is when you're culling out your business, you're going to have a particular um, budgeting in mind, a particular amount that you've thought through is what you're going to require as capital for the next 12, 24, 36 months, whatever that number is, right? Once you've arrived at that number, simply double it. Because India is such an uncertain country, right? Like I always say, this is probably, and again, without recourse, without casting aspersions, right? That is the framework, and it is phenomenally getting alleviated. But the typical factors of production for entrepreneur is are fairly stacked against an entrepreneur, right? Whether it's availability of capital, right? In the conventional parlance, it's not easy to just go walk into any of the financial services firm with a business idea and ask for capital, right? A 20 or a 22-year-old founder is not going to have assets to pledge against which he's going to get money. Rules and regulations. I mean, some are a deterrent, some are for your own good, of course. But one of the most important facets is do not call out any business practice or don't do anything that flouts the rules or regulations. It doesn't help, right? That is the most important aspect: compliance and availability of skilled or learned manpower. Factor these three things because these are going to be the biggest dissuadences or difficulties that you probably face in stitching together. Whatever budgeting you've put there, simply double it because it's that additional cushion which is going to help you tide some of these three factors.
Understood. Thanks for these wonderful advice. I think people who will be watching this video later will have their own share of insights coming out of this whole context, right?
Yes.
Uh, Now, tell me this. Here is, by the way, my last question for today
Sure.
for you. Uh, since you have been recently onboarded with the platform of Tracxn,
Right.
how you intend to utilize the market intel data out of it, and do you want to highlight any specific use case which you are going to sort out using the market intel information which is there on the platform?
So frankly, Supan, I mean, as a co-founder, some of the things that I use Traction for is to definitely keep a track of the competitors, not only domestic but globally, right? It gives you a very good lens on how they're performing and stack your performance vis-a-vis them, right? It serves as a phenomenal parameter. But while I haven't delved deeper into it, but I did love this investor insights section, right? And the fact that it is not only siloed to India, but global competitors as well. And like we said, in the next 12 months, maybe we start the process of fundraise, and in the next 24 months is when we get there. I think Traction is definitely going to be very deeply used by us in terms of sharpening our outreach. Uh, yeah, our outreach. Not that it replaces the role of an investment banker, but it of course makes us a lot smarter in terms of what to expect and preempt whether the trajectory that's being taken by the advisors is right or it probably needs a rerouting.
Got it. Got it. Thanks, Varun. I think we will be there at your service, right? My team will be there to support you for any aspect, right? It was wonderful talking to you. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm sure our audience will do that as well, right? We will be back with another edition of Unwired Connect, maybe in 2027, end of 2027,
Sure.
uh, so that we can connect another success story of yours during that phase of your journey, right? That's all from my side. And on behalf of Tracxn, thank you so much one more time for making some time out of your busy schedule, and wishing you good luck to the entire team of Unwired Connect.
Thank you very much, Supan. It was a pleasure being on the podcast.
Thanks a lot. Please take care. Bye
Yes.
bye.
Bye. Take care.